She had nothing, no home, no food, and no one left in the world but her little brother. So she wrote a letter, not to a person, but to God. Folded in quiet desperation and left in a chapel no one visited, the letter was never meant to be found. But it was. By a man who had everything, wealth, power, influence, but had lost all belief in miracles. Until now. This is a story about fate, second chances, and what happens when two lives from opposite worlds cross paths. Because of a single desperate prayer, the train station was cold, not winter cold, the kind of cold that came from marble floors, silent strangers, and fluorescent lights that never turned off. The kind of cold you get used to, but never really escape. Emily, 17, sat cross-legged, on a bench, her thin hoodie pulled tightly around her shoulders. Beside her, wrapped in an oversized coat that once belonged to their father, slept her little brother, Noah, just 8 years old. She watched him carefully. He hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. She had half a granola bar left. She'd give it to him in the morning. Maybe. In her lap rested a torn notebook page, folded once, then twice. She chewed the end of the pen she'd found in the garbage can at the library. Its ink was fading, but it still worked if she scribbled hard enough. She began to write. Dear God, I don't know if you read letters like this. I don't even know if you're there. But I'm writing this just in case. My name is Emily. I'm 17. My little brother is Noah. We don't have a home. We don't have parents. We don't even have socks that match. I'm not asking for much, just a sign. Just something. That says you haven't forgotten about us, please. Don't let Noah get sick. Don't let me fail him. I'm trying to be brave. But sometimes I feel like I'm disappearing. If you're real, can you please find us before we disappear completely? Love, Emily. She looked at the page for a long time, then folded it carefully, as if creases mattered. At dawn, she walked to the park nearby, the one with the small chapel that always had candles burning, even though she never saw anyone light them. She slipped the letter under the door. No name. No address. Just to God. Then she walked back to the bench, curled up beside Noah, and whispered, I sent it. Let's see if he answers. What she didn't know was that the next person to step into that chapel was Julian Ward, and her life was about to change forever. The chapel stood quiet in the early light, tucked between rows of worn brick buildings and leafless trees that shivered in the wind. Julian Ward hadn't planned to be there. His driver had paused at a red light when Julian noticed the chapel's crooked spire, the kind his late wife used to love. The kind that leans, she once said, but never falls. On impulse, he told the driver to stop. Julian stepped out into the chill, coat wrapped tight, hands buried in his pockets. He hadn't been in a church since the funeral. He didn't believe anymore, not in signs, not in miracles. He believed in numbers, equity, and control, and he was losing all of it. Inside, the chapel smelled of old wood and melted wax. The altar was simple, the silence strange. He was about to leave when something caught his eye, a folded paper, torn at the edges. Tucked under the candle rack, he almost ignored it, but something, a whisper in the chest, made him reach for it. It read, To God. Julian sat on the nearest pew and opened the letter. As he read, something in him cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but like a weight shifting on old bones. The handwriting was uneven, the spelling imperfect. But the voice, raw, young, honest, struck something deeper than he was ready for. He read the last lines again. Can you please find us before we disappear completely? He folded the letter slowly. For the first time in months, Julian felt something unfamiliar. Purpose. He stood up and dialed his assistant. I need a list of all local shelters and soup kitchens. Cross-reference for any recent minor registrants named Emily, about 17, has a younger brother. There was a pause. Sir, why? Julian looked back at the pew where he'd read the letter. Because someone asked God for help. And I found the letter first. Julian Ward had built an empire on logic. He didn't chase ghosts. He didn't follow feelings. But now, he was doing both. By noon, his office was a command center. 3 assistants, 2 private investigators, and 1 retired social worker were pulled into the search. A copy of the letter sat scanned and printed on Julian's desk, circled in red ink, like a clue in a case that had nothing to do with business, and everything to do with belief. 17. Female. Name's Emily. With a little brother named Noah. Last known location? None. The letter was unsigned beyond a first name. Julian paced. Check every shelter, outreach program, food pantry, get photos, ask the staff. I want answers today. His team was confused, but paid well enough not to ask questions. That night, Julian visited a shelter himself. He stepped past shivering men and women, most too tired to notice the billionaire in a tailored coat standing by the entrance. A volunteer greeted him. "Can I help you?" Julian held out the folded letter. "I'm looking for her." The volunteer read the page slowly, her eyes softening. "I wish more people cared about letters like these." "I don't care about the letter," Julian's voice faltered. "I care about the girl who wrote it." The woman nodded toward the back. "There's a girl who comes by sometimes, doesn't sleep here, but she asks for extra bread, always gives it to her brother. Doesn't talk much." "Emily?" The volunteer shrugged, never gave a name. "But I've seen her outside the library on 5th, after hours, reading to her brother." Julian turned toward the door, his heartbeat shifting from businesslike to personal. Tomorrow, he'd go there, not as a CEO, but as an answer to a prayer. The Siwa, old library on 5th Street, had long since shortened its hours, but the front steps stayed warm from the vents underneath. It was just enough to survive the night if you kept close. Julian stood across the street, watching from his car as the city turned to shadow. There they were, a girl, no more than 17, seated cross-legged on the stone steps, her arms around a smaller boy. Her coat was too thin, her shoes didn't match, but her eyes were wide open, locked on the book in her hands. Noah, curled into her side, hung on every word she read aloud. Julian didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched. Across the street, Emily turned a page carefully, making sure not to rip it. The book was missing a cover. Someone had thrown it out, but she'd memorized the title, The Little Prince. She read it over and over to Noah because it made him smile. Because it talked about stars and hope and invisible things. Because it didn't mention food or cold or people disappearing. When Noah finally fell asleep, Emily gently pulled her coat tighter around him and rested her cheek against his head. And that's when the memories returned. The fire. The night their house turned into smoke. Their mother screaming. Their father carrying Noah out but never making it back in. The foster homes that split them. The escape. The promise. I'll never let them take you again. Now here they were, together, yes, but hungry, unseen and barely hanging on. Emily looked up at the sky. She didn't believe in miracles, but she believed in trying. And that's why she wrote the letter. What she didn't know, as she drifted into shallow sleep, was that someone was watching from the dark, and he wasn't going to let her disappear. The next evening, Emily sat on the same library steps, quietly unwrapping 2 pieces of dry toast from a brown napkin. She gave the larger one to Noah, who smiled, his lips already chapped from the cold. "Is this dinner?" he asked, still cheerful. She forced a smile. "It's dinner and dessert." He laughed, not realizing she hadn't eaten since yesterday. Across the street, Julian watched again. Not from a car this time. He crossed slowly, carefully, afraid of startling them. Not because he was a billionaire or a stranger, but because something about this moment felt sacred. He approached from the side, keeping his voice low. "Excuse me," he said. "I don't mean to bother you." Emily snapped to attention, immediately pulling Noah behind her like a reflex. "We're not begging," she said sharply. "We're fine." Julian raised both hands gently. "I believe you. I just wanted to offer something warm." He handed her a small paper bag, from the bakery down the street. She hesitated. Noah peeked from behind her, catching the smell of butter and sugar. Emily looked into Julian's face. Clean-shaven, expensive coat, eyes too kind for someone. "That rich? Why?" she asked, voice flat. Because it's cold and I hate toast, he replied, shrugging. They sat together that night, awkward, quiet. Julian on one step, Emily beside Noah, who devoured the croissants like they were treasure. Eventually, Emily spoke. You from the church? Julian blinked. No. You a cop? Definitely not. She studied him for a long time. So why? Are you really here? He paused, reached into his coat and held out the folded page. Because you wrote this, Emily's eyes widened. Where did you get that? From the chapel, yesterday morning. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You read it? Julian nodded, and I haven't stopped thinking about it since. Emily stared at the letter in Julian's hand, the one she'd folded in the dark, the one she'd left for God. It looked smaller now, more fragile, like a secret that had grown too big to contain. She didn't move, didn't speak, just blinked, slowly. You weren't supposed to see that, she finally said, her voice a mix of shame and anger. It wasn't for anyone to actually read. Julian didn't flinch. I know. She stood abruptly, pulling Noah to his feet. Thanks for the food, but we don't need charity. It wasn't charity. Julian's voice was calm, but firm. It was a response. To what? He held her gaze. To your letter. Emily shook her head, tears rising fast. You don't know me. You don't know what we've been through. You're right, I don't. Julian took a step closer. But I know what it feels like to ask for help and believe no one's listening. She froze. That was too accurate. Too close. What do you want? He looked down at Noah, who was still holding the last bite of his pastry like it was gold, then back at her. A chance to help, a warm place for the night, some options, that's all. Emily's walls were cracking, but they'd cracked before and still people left. What if you change your mind? She asked. Julian paused. I already did, he said. I thought the world didn't care anymore, that people like you would always be invisible. But your letter changed something. In me. He held it out again, gently this time. Let me change. Something for you, too. Emily didn't say yes, not yet, but for the first time in years. She didn't say no either. She took the letter back, and for now that was enough. The house wasn't what Emily expected. It wasn't cold or sharp-edged, like the business buildings Julian probably owned. It wasn't gold-trimmed or soulless. It was quiet. A guest house tucked behind a larger estate, with ivy crawling up its walls and windows that let the morning light in without asking permission. Julian had driven them there himself. No security guards. No assistants. Just him, Emily, and a sleeping Noah in the back seat. When they pulled into the long gravel driveway, Emily tensed. If this is where you lock us in, she started. Julian held up a hand. The keys are yours. Inside, there was a fire already lit, clean blankets, soft beds, a kitchen stocked with food. Emily didn't know what to do. She stood frozen in the doorway, afraid that stepping further in would make it disappear. Noah, on the other hand, ran straight for the couch and wrapped himself in the fluffiest blanket he'd ever seen. He whispered, eyes wide. We're not outside anymore. Her chest tightened. Later that evening, Julian returned with school enrollment papers, medical forms, and a job offer. I have a foundation, he said. We need someone smart, organized, someone who's lived through more than statistics. Emily shook her head. I don't want handouts. It's not a handout, he said. It's a beginning. She hesitated. What if I mess it up? He smiled softly. Then you try again, and this time you won't be doing it alone. That night, as she tucked Noah into a real bed for the first time in over a year, she didn't cry, but she did whisper, Thank you. And even though she wasn't sure who she was saying it to, she knew someone was listening. It started with a whisper. Julian's PR director had begged him to release the story. The girl who wrote to God. He resisted at first. It wasn't a press stunt. It was personal, but Emily said yes. If it helps other people like us, and she said, then tell them everything. So they did. A single article hit the newsstands. Billionaire answers letter to God, changes homeless teen's life forever. Within hours it went viral. Social media exploded. People shared her words. Strangers quoted lines from her letter. Some cried, some doubted. Others sent donations to Julian's foundation in her name. Letter to God trended for days. Emily watched it all unfold from the living room couch. Noah nestled beside her, laughing at the sight of her face on a TV screen. But not everyone was kind. Online comments began pouring in. She's just using him. She made the whole thing up. Another gold digger with a sob story. He's doing this for attention. The world she was invisible in had suddenly turned its full gaze on her, and it was too much. She closed the laptop. I didn't ask for this, she whispered. Julian stood quietly behind her. No, he said, but sometimes light comes with shadows. She looked up. I don't want to be the girl from the letter anymore, he sat beside her. Then be the girl who rewrites the ending. But while Emily tried to move forward, someone from Julian's world was planning to drag her backward. Emily had just begun to feel safe, truly safe. She was working part-time at Julian's foundation, attending high school classes online, and even helping plan a program for homeless teens. Noah was thriving. He had a tutor, a warm bed, and for the first time a lunchbox with his name on it. But peace, she was learning, was fragile. One afternoon she overheard them, 2 board members, whispering just outside Julian's office. She's not even legal. Family. This is all emotion. She's a liability, not an investment. She could ruin him if this turns scandalous. Her stomach sank. They were talking about her. Again. Just like the foster homes. Just like the shelters. Just like every place that said we care, but only on paper. That night she packed a small bag. Just the basics. She left a note on Julian's desk. You found my letter to God, but I never meant for you to lose everything over me. I needed help, and you gave me a life. I'll never stop being grateful, but now I need to disappear again. Not for me, for you. She folded it once and left. By morning, the guest house was empty. Noah was gone too, a small scribble beside his pillow. Where Emily goes, I go. Julian read the notes silent, but he didn't panic. He read them again and noticed something only someone who truly knew her would see. They weren't goodbye letters, they were breadcrumbs. And then he found the second letter. It was tucked in the pages of The Little Prince on the library steps, wrapped in the same faded envelope she'd used that first night, addressed not to God, but to him. Julian sat on the steps of the 5th Street Library, the same place where he'd first seen her. In his hands, a weathered envelope. On the front, in familiar handwriting, to the man God sent. His fingers trembled as he unfolded. The letter. Dear Julian, I asked God for food. I asked him to keep my brother warm. I asked him to find us before we disappeared. And then you showed up. You weren't a miracle. You were a man who made a choice to stop, to care, to see. That was enough. You gave us more than shelter. You gave us a future I didn't believe existed, but now I need to prove that I can stand without leaning too hard on someone else's kindness. I'm not running. I'm rebuilding. You gave me the first chapter. Now I'm going to write the rest. With love, Emily. Julian folded the letter slowly. He looked beside him and smiled. Because there she was, Emily, standing quietly, a backpack slung over one shoulder, Noah beside her, holding The Little Prince in one hand and Julian's favorite coffee in the other. I didn't go far, she said softly. Julian stood. I knew you wouldn't. I just needed to know that I could come back by choice, not because I was saved again. Julian nodded. Then he opened his arms, and she walked straight into them. 1 year later, Emily read her college acceptance letter from a dorm room, filled with photos. Noah on his first day of school, Julian standing beside her at a scholarship ceremony, the chapel, the library steps, and her letter, the first one, framed and hung on the wall. She smiled. Sometimes God doesn't answer, with thunder. Sometimes he sends a man in a coat with a paper bag and a reason to believe again.